Dow. For years, alternative economic analysts have been warning that the miraculous rise in U.S. stock markets has been the symptom of wider central bank intervention, and that this will result in dire future consequences. We've heard endless lies and rationalizations as to why this could not be so, and why the U.S. recovery is real. At the beginning of 2016, the former head of the Dallas branch of the Federal Reserve crushed all the skeptics and vindicated our position in an interview with CNBC, where he stated, quote, "What the Fed did, and I was part of that group, is we front-loaded a tremendous market rally starting in 2009. It's sort of what I call the reverse wimpy factor. Give me 2 hamburgers today for 1 tomorrow. I'm not surprised that almost every index you can look at was down significantly," referring to the results of the stock market after the Fed raised rates in December. End quote. Fisher continued his warning, though his predictions, in my view, are widely conservative or deliberately muted. Quote, "I was warning my colleagues, don't go wobbly if you have a 10 to 20% correction at some point. Everybody you talk to has been warning that these markets are heavily priced," end quote. Here is the issue. Stocks are a mostly meaningless factor when considering the economic health of a nation. Equities are a casino based on nothing but the luck of the draw when it comes to news headlines, central banking statements, and algorithmic computers. Today, as Fisher openly admitted, stocks are purely manipulated indicator representing nothing but the amount of stimulus central banks are willing to pour into them through various channels. Even when the incredible monetary support pulled together by international financiers, returns on equity investments continue to remain mostly flat. It would seem that the propping up of indexes like the Dow has been only for the sake of keeping up appearances. For many people, revenue is barely being generated. Unfortunately, the majority of Americans do not care to educate themselves on the finer points of finance. Their only relation to the health of the economy is their daily glance at the Dow. If it is green or at all times high, they assume that all is well, even if their gut is telling them something is not quite right. The elites that stand at the helm of the Federal Reserve understand this dynamic very well. They're not stupid. They know that the whole of the global economy could be in a shambles, but as long as stocks remain positive, the masses will continue to ignore reality until the flames of destabilization are at their very doorsteps. With this fact in mind, one might think that the Fed would consider it in their best interest to keep stimulus measures operating indefinitely, but that is not what they are doing. In fact, the Fed, along with other central banks like the ECB, the European Central Bank, has been slowly peeling back pillars of support from markets that have been in place since 2008-2009, and leaving the system open to a crisis event that should have been dealt with years ago. I explained this process of deliberate destabilization in my article, "The Global Economic Reset Has Begun." In that piece, I outlined the 3 major pillars holding up the U.S. market system and certain parts of our economy and how they're being systematically removed. The first pillar was the use of bailouts and quantitative easing measures. These were diminished through the implementation of the Fed taper, which I predicted would happen 3 months prior that year. The second pillar was the use of a near zero interest rates, which allowed numerous banks and corporations to access low-cost and no-cost overnight loans from the Fed. These companies then used these loans in large part to support a never-ending program of stock buybacks, which reduced the stock pool and artificially boosted the value of the remaining stocks. I predicted in August of 2015 that the Fed would hike interest rates and that this would be the beginning of the end for the stock buyback bonanza. The Fed hiked rates in December of that year. This process of removing backdoor manipulation through the low interest rates should be our main concern right now. Early in 2016, I believed that the Fed would reach a position in which it would finally unleash a series of rate hikes. I did not think they would be so blatant as to wait until right after the US presidential election to do so. I was wrong. This is why I eventually predicted the launch of a series of rate hikes starting right after the election of Donald Trump in my article, World Suffers from Trump Shell Shock. Here's what will happen next. The Fed has now once again hiked interest rates with assertions that they will be accelerating such hikes throughout 2017. As I've been arguing for most of the past year, the election of Donald Trump was inevitable and would precede the triggering of the final stage of our ongoing economic crisis. I came to realize that the Fed's timing of their latest rate hike is highly strategic. Not only does it set the stage for a series of hikes that will crush U.S. stock markets this coming year and finally shock the public out of their fiscal stupor, but it also maneuvers the crisis right into the lap of Donald Trump and the conservative movement that supports him. Beyond this, it perpetuates an increasing left-right division in America. Think about it. During a fiscal crisis under Trump, triggered by accumulating Fed rate hikes, liberals will immediately set upon Trump as the culprit, while conservatives will immediately defend Trump as a victim of Federal Reserve meddling. The Federal Reserve and the mainstream media are already composing the narrative by stating that Trump's potential economic policies and a widening budget deficit will require higher rates at a faster pace in order to be accommodated. I have heard arguments from some that this tactic would simply not work, that people would never buy a narrative in which Trump and conservatives are blamed for a market collapse that was at least 8 years in the making. I have to say, this view is incredibly naive. I understand why people would want to embrace the notion that the public is as savvy as the liberal movement when looking at economic events, but this simply isn't reality. A large portion of the US population identifies with the left, quote-unquote, end of the political spectrum. We have already seen how they react in the face of a Trump election win. They are predisposed to believe that Trump is responsible for a market crash regardless of the facts. Not to mention, much of the rest of the world is economically ignorant and will likely jump on the anti-conservative bandwagon during a crisis as well. But the real master stroke of this strategy on the part of the elites is that it creates a perfect platform for the destruction of the US dollar world reserve status. The destruction of the US dollar world reserve status. The third and final pillar I mentioned months ago that is supporting our economic system. Imagine that the Fed's rate hike frenzy sparks an open feud between the central bank and Trump. Some people might say, good, shut the bastards down. However, this is exactly what the elites want. With the Feds at odds with the President of the United States, faith in the US dollar will plummet. Its world reserve status will be destroyed. And instead of being blamed on central banks, the majority of people around the world will claim it was the fault of Donald Trump. With a historically sufficient excuse for the end of the dollar dominance in hand, the elites can move forward with their great global reset, which includes the replacement of the dollar with the International Monetary Fund special drawing rights as the go-to reserve currency mechanism. The SDR basket is an essential bridge in the formation of a single global monetary unit and a true single global currency. One world currency. I believe that the Fed will not only continue hiking interest rates through 2017, but that some of these rate hikes may be larger than many people expect, 50 basis points or more. I believe this will be designed to foster extreme tensions between the executive branch and the central bank. A few months ago, I would have said that Trump may or may not be aware of this dynamic and the potential that he is a scapegoat. Now that I have seen Trump's cabinet picks, which include neocon and Goldman Sachs alumni, I have little doubt that he is fully cognizant of the plan. I will be writing more on the issue of Trump as a Trojan horse in my next article. In the meantime, I would point out that all of the elements of psychological support for stock markets will also disappear in the face of a Trump versus establishment narrative. All those leftist media outlets cherry-picking economic stats and telling half-truths to support the recovery lie now have no reason to continue cheerleading for the economy. I expect that propaganda rags like Reuters and Bloomberg will quickly change their tune with Trump in the Oval Office and begin a consistent chorus of negative financial data. Not only will the Fed remove all support from the system, but the mainstream media will be pounding day traders with the kind of doom and gloom headlines that they have been criticizing us for over years. Make no mistake, the election of Donald Trump may have some in the liberty movement ready to pack up their preps and forget about any national crisis in their lifetimes, but the truth is, vigilance is needed now more than ever. I said it before the election and I'll say it again today. Do not get comfortable. The times are about to get even more interesting. This is from Brandon Smith on Activist Post. I'll leave a link below for you for this.